Welcome to Dave's American Flyer Trains. Join me to explore American Flyer Trains by A.C. Gilbert, rebuilt and maintained to engineering practices, factory specifications, standards, and underpinned by lessons learned from literature, experience, collaboration, and applied knowledge to update and advance the skill of this craft. Please subscribe. Together we'll preserve these great trains through value-added quality content. Remember, the trains are the show. I'll start with the removal of the side frames and their structure by releasing 4 screws, this one, and then number 3 here and number 4 here, and removing that truck assembly and framework. I do plan on washing it just to make sure that there's not any household dust or anything that is anti-productive on it, and then probably set those aside for a while, and then we'll go from there. The truck side and bottom plate assemblies are removed, and I've begun my standard practice of mapping the screws to paper with tape so that I can keep up with them, move them around very easily, and not worry about them rolling around. I choose this method over dropping them into cups because my past experience, particularly with some older steam locomotives, is that you're going to accumulate quite a bit of screws when you take those apart, especially coming from some of the side rod assemblies. And they can be mixed up. They may not fit when you return them back, has been my experience. And I like to keep the screw, when it came from a particular place, put it back in that same place in case the threads, gives, I think, the greater chance the threads match up. Nothing unusual on these, except I did note the clumps of grease that were pushed out by the motors. You can see them there, stuck to the bottom of the frame assembly. Same thing on this one. I don't think it was over lubricated. To me, this looks like factory lubrication. Nothing unusual on the PA unit so far. There is a little bit of grease, which still appears to be pliable inside of these gearboxes. Let's see if it looks, yeah, it's definitely pliable. So that is probably not its problem. The wheels are unusually clean for a train this age, which to me means it just wasn't operated that much. The whole thing is clean. No slung oil or anything. We've already noted that this motor mount or field mount or field bracket, which is a combination, you'll note. This is the combination field and motor assembly yoke. You notice in other trains later, Gilbert put in a separate yoke or mount for the field and then the one for the motor. And they have a different type of screw. This one is a round head screw. It's relatively short when compared to those that hold in the double yokes. And you'll notice this one is separated a little bit. It should not be that way. It should fit firmly and snugly against that slot right there in the motor. Wheels are relatively clean, again, when you think of its age and the possibility it's had for the number of hours of operation. But I'll be glad to get the body off, just to get it out of the way. By the way, the screws that hold these side mounts on are S230, I believe. Let me just double check. Yeah, they're S230, and they are the same screw that is used right there to hold the reverse unit on. That won't be the case when you get to the ones that have the double mounting brackets or yokes. All right, let's get the body off, because I'll be glad to set that aside as I want to reduce the chances of scarring it any. So there's 4 screws, one here, one right down there. Is there one back here? Yep, there's one right there. And then there's one right here that holds the lamp bracket on and the reflection shield, and also holds the frame to the body. Let's get those off. Now, when Gilbert started putting in the open pilot versus the closed pilot. In other words, you have the coupler that comes out in front of the locomotive, which was more prototypical. Sometimes they had an overstock of these solid pilots. So what did they do? They sawed them out. If you have some PA units and you take them apart, or you don't even really need to take them apart, you might turn them over and just look at them. If they were sawed out, as in they used stock from 51 and 52 on later trains, you'll see the saw striation marks along the body. They did a nice job, but you can still see the marks where the saws cut through there. We've separated the chassis from the body, but before we move on and take a look at that, as I mentioned before, we've got the bottom plate and the side frame assemblies set aside. They'll be washed later, but typical of most of these diesels, there's 4 screws holding the body to the frame. I noted that the screws at either end seem to have a longer shaft, and they're pointed like wood screws, which to me looks like a non-standard screw. These appear to be, I believe these should be S230 or no, S319s, which are typical for these, but they have a shorter shaft on them, and leads me to believe that maybe the ones at the end were not gripping, so the owner changed them to these. Not a bad idea. What I have found time to time that helps me to get these screws to reseat firmly, couple of things, and I'm sure that there's other ways of doing it. Many of you probably have figured those out, is that sometimes I will simply pack these, I'll just use this one right here, pack these screw seating areas where the screws should attach with standard DuPont airplane modeler's glue, and pack it in and let that cure for a while. Then go back and drill it out with a tiny drill such that I can get the screw restarted. Now the glue doesn't do any damage. It actually can be picked out later, but it does provide a real simple way to provide a smaller hole to seat the screws in. The other thing I've done is to wrap the shafts of the screw, and you can find this at any hardware store, with plumber's tape, and just wrap it around several times. It gives a little more width to the shaft and a little tackiness to hold the screws in. So that's just a tip. Now we're going to set aside the body, thank goodness. And by the way, the body did not have a build date stamp in it. I don't know when they started that practice, but that one did not have one. Several things to note, but let's go back and pick up where we left off. As I expected, there's no E-clip here. Now there is a washer here. And what is the E-clip? Well, it looks like an E, and it's that top clip right there. It just snaps on the shaft, and for some reason that one is popped off. We certainly want to repair that, just out of convenience, to make sure the train is running on an even plane with both motors being at an equal height, but we also don't want the whole motor assembly to be supported by the solder point. That is just a roadmap for failure. We don't want it touching the frame, for one thing, and we don't want it wearing that out and possibly breaking off. The other thing I noted is that the reverse unit wiring with a rainbow wire is nicely done, and obviously it was done before Gilbert started cutting back a lot and putting these wires sometimes so short in here you can't do hardly anything. But there's nice loops in both of these, and what I found is that when I'm ready to work on the reverse unit, it gives me enough wiring that I can disable or separate the reverse unit from the chassis and work on it. Be able to flip it over, take any components out, brushes, the drum, everything for a complete rebuild. Likewise, when I drop the motors down, there's enough loop here to drop the motor down that I can work on it. Actually probably stand it upright outside the frame. A colleague a long time ago, a colleague told me when I first started back in 2015, he said, always start with a reverse unit. It's just like in software engineering. You start with a depth and build out. Get the reverse unit right, and you're probably going to have a much higher probability of success when you rebuild or maintain or possibly repair a train after it's been rebuilt and you've established a new baseline. Get this right and you're on the road to success. In other words, one of the things he's saying is that if you ignore this and then go in and rebuild the motor and it still doesn't run, you still don't know if you've got the motor correct, if it's the motor or the reverse unit. The opposite of that is I like to get these perfected so that I know that it has electrical flow, its operation is correct, all the contact points are working, all the components are working, and then when I go to the motor, I have a higher probability of being successful. Plus, if I'm not successful, I won't go pointing back at the reverse unit. I've done something wrong on the motor. Again, it has the single yoke or mount bracket here that holds not only the field, but the whole motor assembly. That won't be true in later versions when there's separate mounting brackets or yoke assemblies for those. I actually prefer that second type over these any day. And you notice that screw is the same one that holds the reverse unit to the frame. All right, it's time now to take the reverse unit out. Before we move on, I stand corrected. Before I was about to set this down, I noticed, even though it is really hard to see, that there is a build date stamp inside of this train right there, right around those scars, which I don't know what those were caused by, right there. It is March, M-A-R, 1951. So this one had to be one of the earlier of these 365 set and of these Alco diesels. Look at that, March 1951. So what does that give it? Wouldn't that give it about 74 years of life? It's remarkable how some of these have existed that long and still show up in this condition. Now I've already got in stock some Santa Fe decals, but I noticed that I do not have the left-facing chief. This one needs to be replaced. I do have the numbers, but I noticed that, and I'm not being critical, but I noticed some of them that I've ordered before, I'm going to have to assume they came from Port Lunds, are a little bit larger than I expected. This one, I'm not too sure where I got it, but it looks more like that 360. I'm going to try to go back to Port Lunds and see if that's where I got this one. I'm not sure where I got this other set of decals, which has more of the Santa Fe decals on it. I do have the right-facing chief, but that's not the one I need. It's even got the Santa Fe cross up there in the right-hand corner. I'll have to go back and investigate that, but we want to get it looking good, and I'll consult with the owner for his preferences. Before we continue on with the reverse unit, just a couple things to wrap up with the truck side and bottom plate assemblies. I went ahead and removed the excess grease that had accumulated here, being pushed out of the gearbox on both of these. I did that, and you can see how much grease it removed that was serving no purpose except for going along for the ride. And I used the number 17 X-Acto knife. I found that to be pretty useful for a lot of purposes as a scraper. So I used that to get it out. Alcohol wiped it, washed both. Now usually what I do upon the washing being finished and dry is I'll check a couple of things. One is whether or not the side frames are rotating on this bottom plate assembly at the contact points or the attachment points there and there. So I just hold it and attempt gently to rock them back and forth. You can see my thumbs moving just a little bit in that direction. These are not loose. They're not wiggling excessively. I have found these to wiggle excessively, and I don't think that that is something good going forward. I also check the inside of these side frames for any type of wheel marks where they might be scraping. Certainly friction and drag is not part of this and shouldn't be. Neither one of these had any wheel markings. I have found some that were pretty excessive. That could be an indication of the wiggle in the side frames not being attached properly, or enough, or it could mean that the gauge is too wide on the wheels and axles. The other thing that I do is that if I do find some wiggle, I will go ahead and clamp the side frames like this using a real small clamp. Not a lot of pressure, just gentle pressure. And then I will insert crazy glue around this joint right there to let it soak in and overnight solidify and provide at least enough bonding to keep the wiggle down or eliminate it. Now these side frames are non-load bearing, which means that the crazy glue ought to be plenty adequate enough to keep these in the right position. Thanks to everyone who watched this video to the end. Please subscribe to the channel to see more of this content. Give a like or comment as you see fit. And above all, remember, the trains are the show.